Hello, welcome back to another video. This week I tackled a full scene study in watercolor and color pencil. I tried out a new medium, white ink, and learned more about rendering on a small scale. Let's get started. The supplies I used include Arch's hot press watercolor paper, Faber-Castell's 12 set of Polychromos pencils, Derwent Drawing Pencils from the red set, a white POSCA acrylic paint pen, a Derwent pencil extender, a Mars Lumograph HB pencil, a Tombow mono ultrafine eraser, Dr. P.H. Martin's pen white ink, and Daniel Smith's Watercolor Essentials split primary set. As always, I started with a sketch transfer using a light box. This time, I kept the sketch fairly loose since I would be practicing rendering foliage and texture instead of precise details for most of the study. After taping the paper to my desk, I began by laying down a wash of green mixed from phthalo blue, Hansa yellow light, and new gamboge. While this wash was still wet, I softened off the edges with clean water. If this was a digital study, I would have worked back to front, but since watercolor needs time to dry, I opted to work on areas that didn't touch each other to save time. In this case, I was able to lay down the base wash of warm tan on the figure and her hat, as well as the highlights for the rocks in the foreground. Once this layer was fully dry, I started adding detail and depth with darker washes, slowly building out form with value. It was refreshing to paint the tree leaves because I didn't have to worry about backruns or unevenness. Water blooms and random splotches just added more texture and character to the background. I was able to focus on color instead of edge control and technique. Even though all the layers were painted with green, the exact mixtures and color temperatures varied based on what I saw in the reference. The lighter areas contained more Hansa yellow for the yellow-green tinge of light passing through leaves. The deeper areas in shadow contained more blue, and even a touch of pyrrole scarlet to introduce an olive undertone, which decreased the saturation. Between background layers, I blocked in the dress using a desaturated blue-gray and the water with a cool green. I continually added depth and variation to the figure's skin with touches of red and orange. Eventually, I decided to block in the flowers with warm yellow. I was nervous about how I was going to tackle these blooms, not because of their color, but because of the contrast between the clean yellow and orange against the varied green of the grass. If I made one wrong stroke when painting the grass, the flowers would be obliterated because the greens had such a high tinting strength thanks to the phthalo blue in that mixture. I continued thinking about this as I rendered the figure and even when I tried the pen white bottle of ink to pick out highlights on the background. I don't think this is how the ink is meant to be used, but it works surprisingly well this way. I was pleased that watercolor could layer over the dried ink and still retain most of its vibrancy. Alas, my fears came true when I finally started working on the grass. I tried to avoid painting over the flowers, but this left light patches around them, which made this area feel unfinished. Part of the issue came from value. Since the background was the same value as the flowers, their edges were lost and didn't stand out as a distinct shape. In general, this was the most difficult part of the watercolor phase because it required the most edge control and differed the most from the reference. I didn't want to capture every single stem and leaf in the grass since it wouldn't fit with a semi-loose, value-orientated background. I tried squinting to reduce the amount of detail. In the end, I decided to meld things together with a cool green wash and to fix the issues I saw in the next phase instead. Here's where the study was at after the watercolor phase. I'm happy with some parts like the trees and water, but I definitely overcomplicated areas like the rocks and grass. The first thing I did after placing the study at an angle was to carve out definitive edges for the flowers with a sharp white pencil. The Derwent pencil's opaque qualities let it cover even the deepest greens. This made an excellent base for the oranges and yellows I layered on top. These colors are naturally more transparent in color pencils, so this white base made them pop and stay true to color. I turned my focus to the grass next. It felt simultaneously busy and muddy, so I unified the values with a dark mixture of browns and greens, then started picking out faint suggestions of leaves and stems using lighter green. I reversed this process on areas that were too dark by laying down white like I had with the flowers, then adding green. Before I started doing foliage and plant studies, I wouldn't have noticed just how much brown is in leaves. In nature, what we think of as green is often mottled with brown spots, dry tips, and color variation and transitions between different sections of the plant. Adding brown gave the impression of more detail and realism without becoming overwhelming. After that, I used the POSCA to pick out the brightest highlights along the edges. This was too stark by itself, so I layered green and brown to blend the acrylic back into the softer watercolor and color pencil. One area that still needed work was the upper section of the grass. In the photo, there was a patch of light breaking through the tree leaves, which backlit some of the grass blades and flowers. I accidentally painted over this area in the watercolor phase, so I reintroduced the white with the POSCA. Overlapping organic forms and pencil created a defined border between the midground grass and background leaves. From there, I moved into the focal point, the figure. You would think that after months of rendering figures using pencil and watercolor, this would be easier, but it wasn't. I worried about the scale when I first chose this photo, and my worries played out, as I struggled to add precise detail on a tiny figure. The entire face is less than half an inch, or roughly 1¼ centimeters tall. The smallest I could normally work is 1 by 1 inches for portrait thumbnails, but this was smaller than that. At that scale, it was hard to capture fine details, even with a freshly sharpened Polychromos. Some of my pencils were also getting short enough to require the extender to use. This tool proved invaluable for colors like the light ultramarine and burnt ochre, which were useful in shadows on the figure. I ended up taking a break to work on the rock and surrounding short grass instead. Working on these areas gave my hand a chance to calibrate itself to working at such a small scale. The final part of the study was rendering the white dress. Like I've mentioned before, white is an interesting shade to render because it picks up on all the colors around it. This time, it picked up on the blue and green from the foliage, which I accented in the deepest folds before adding the final highlights with another round of white ink. After that, I called the study done. Is this my most accurate and detailed study? No. Did I learn a lot from it? Yeah. I'm glad I pushed myself to work on a smaller scale with a relatively complex background. There are things I would do differently, like use smaller brushes for example, but overall, I'll call this one a success. Thanks for watching to the end, and as always, I hope you created something that brought you joy this week. I'll see you Friday with another video. Bye!